Welcome back to History 1302. Today's lecture is on the Age of Industrialization, and I want to begin by talking about the Gilded Age, specifically that little term right there, the Gilded Age. Let's talk about what it is and defining it. So Mark Twain, the famous author, American author Mark Twain, and Charles Dudley. They were the first to call these years after the Civil War the Gilded Age. They were struck by what they saw as rampant greed and speculative frenzy of the marketplace and the corruption that pervaded national politics. So they satirized a society whose serious problems they felt had been veiled by a thin coating of gold, which is what gilded means. If you were to take a piece of jewelry, right, and you look at it in the back, it'll say it's either 24 karat gold, or it might be something that is not pure gold, but rather gold plated. Right, so on the inside, it could be made up of any other material, and so by calling the United States, this time period, the Gilded Age, what they were saying was that although the United States seemed to be really prosperous and growing, and all kinds of new products and technologies are being developed, on the inside, all of this was really kind of like rotten to the core. It's like covered in this thin layer of gold, but on the inside, all of that wealth, all of that power that was amassed by a few was really done doing some pretty bad things. And so, even though Mark Twain said this such a long time ago, it still continues to be a defining term for this time period, because they really hit the nail on the head with this one. Okay, so let's talk about what happened during this Gilded Age. Okay, there's a couple of things I want to highlight before moving on to the rise of corporate America. And the Gilded Age can really be defined as, rapid economic growth that was taking place during this time. It's generating massive amounts of wealth. Okay, there are also new products and technologies being developed, and on the whole, they improved middle class quality of life, but industrial workers and farmers did not share in this new prosperity. Okay, why? Well, because they were working long hours in dangerous conditions for very low pay. In addition to this, Gilded Age politicians were also largely corrupt and ineffective. And even though most Americans during the Gilded Age wanted political and social reforms, they disagreed strongly on what kind of reform and, how they should go about fixing America's problems. Now, the progressive era is something that we're going to be touching on in the next unit. For now, we are going to talk about all of these changes that are happening, and of course the problems that took place as a result of the industrialization of the United States. Okay, so as massive wealth is being accumulated, by really, not that many individuals, but by a few. Massive amounts of wealth is being accumulated, and at the same time, there are people living in extreme poverty. Okay, so let's talk about the rise of corporate America. Okay, and one term in particular that I want to discuss is robber barons. Okay, so robber barons were businessmen who used what were considered to be exploitative practices in order to amass their wealth. And some of these practices, some examples of these practices include exercising control over national resources. They also accumulated high levels of government influence, coupled with paying extremely low wages. They also squashed competition by acquiring competitors in order to create monopolies that, eventually led to raising prices, and schemes to sell stocks at inflated prices to unsuspecting investors in a way which would eventually destroy the company for which the stock was issued and impoverish the investors. So essentially, what they're doing here is controlling the market for personal gain. Okay? So the term robber baron combines the sense of criminal wrongdoing, right? Hence the word robber. And by putting it together with baron, okay, they're basically alluding to an illegitimate aristocracy, right? A baron is an illegitimate role in a republic. We don't have titles of nobility in the United States. So by saying that these guys here are robber barons, it's like acknowledging that they have this power and wealth and privilege that is, equated to somebody like in a royal family. But hello, we are living in the United States. So how did these people get to that point where they amassed so much wealth, where they got so much power, where they had, they're living this other life that most Americans cannot even dream of reaching? How did they do it? Well, that's where the robber baron comes in, right? They did it by doing something criminal. So the guys that we're going to be discussing today, just a few of them, but we're going to talk about John D. Rockefeller first, okay? So John Rockefeller and Standard Oil, they are, well, he is actually one of the most powerful, richest men in this time period. He has a very interesting sort of backstory here. The guy was completely abstinent from alcohol and tobacco his entire life. Okay, he was, he didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't even swear, right? No bad words. He was a very, very serious guy, highly religious, and very ambitious. Okay, he ended up starting Standard Oil refinery in Cleveland, Ohio in 1897. When he was just 18, he bought his first oil refinery, right? So think about that, right? What were you doing at that age, or you're nearing that age? Kind of puts us all to shame. But he basically started out by merging several refineries into one, and he quickly began to push out all the other, smaller refineries. He started building a trust. Now, the way that he did this, one of the, tactics that he used was basically he threatened to bankrupt, his competitors if they didn't sell to him. So imagine this, right? It's like you have your business, your refinery, and Rockefeller comes around and, makes you an offer. I want to buy your business. How much do you want for it? And this is your business. It's your baby. You worked hard for it. You're not going to sell. You're not going to do that. You're not going to give it to him. And if that's the kind of attitude that you took with somebody like Rockefeller, he basically said something like, well, okay, well, you can either sell it to me and make a little bit of profit, or you can watch me bankrupt you and watch me buy your business for pennies on the dollar on the auction block. I mean, that's the kind of guy that he was, right? He was very ruthless. He believed that he was better than his competitors, and he didn't see anything wrong in what he was doing because he believed that he was obeying the law of nature. So what is that about, right? Somebody who is super religious. I mean, this doesn't seem like a very Christian thing to do. But again, if he sees it from the perspective, well, I'm the best in my industry. Why should I let somebody that doesn't work as hard as I do, that doesn't, dedicate their life to their business? Why shouldn't I buy them out if I'm better than them? And so a lot of this stuff that we're going to be discussing today, not just in politics, but also in business and as well as society, has a lot to do with this idea of social Darwinism, right? So we'll talk more about that in a minute. But again, Rockefeller, completely ruthless guy, believed that he was doing what he was good at. He's obeying the law of nature. Didn't feel bad at all about doing this. Okay, so as a result of Rockefeller's, trust building and edging out his competition, he's going to end up sort of developing this system of horizontal integration. Or no, let me see. Yes, horizontal integration, where, like how a horse runs right across the landscape. So he's basically buying up all the competitors, all of his competition. He's building this monopoly. And he edges everybody out. And the result of that is, of course, there are some positives like, better quality, cheaper prices, better machinery because he could afford it. But the other thing too is that, he ends up getting into these price wars with his competitors. Because one of the things that you might be wondering is, well, how does he bankrupt his competitors? Well, this is what he would do. If you had let's say a gas station, right? A refinery. And he's determined he's going to buy you out. He's going to own your business because he wants it. He wants to control it. One of the things that he would do is as he got bigger and bigger, he could afford to drop his prices way low so that you couldn't compete. So that eventually, you were going to be out of business. And when the time was right, he'd buy it up. And so, that's how he built that trust. And the problem with this is that other companies also are going to copy John Dee's trust approach to monopolizing the industry. And so we're going to have, a sugar trust, a tobacco trust, a leather trust, harvester trust. We're talking about 200 different competitors. Complete monopoly on these resources, on these industries. And like I said, these guys are determined to win it all. That brings me to the railroad kings. And so just two of the railroad kings here are George Pullman and Cornelius Vanderbilt. Remember how when people began to settle around the railroad, the government gave land to these railroad companies, right? Because they were interested in building the transcontinental railroad, but connecting the country. It's a big, big country, right? You got the East Coast and the West Coast. And as the railroads became more important, this made the land around the railroads more desirable. And when that happens, prices go up. So the work from the railroad working with the railroad was highly desirable, and services were in high demand. And so this, of course, sets the stage for corruption. Okay, what ends up happening is guys like Vanderbilt and Pullman, they become so powerful, so extremely wealthy. There's all kinds of back deals and kickbacks going on, rebates for large haulers while, small farmers paid the big price. John Rockefeller, for example, demanded if a train, hauled his competitors' merchandise, that he was going to, take his business elsewhere. And conversely, he could demand that these railroad companies give him a better deal. Because one, you don't want to piss off, Rockefeller. But two, he'll make good on that threat. And he eventually did. He ended up building his own railroad. He didn't want to deal with those railroad guys anyways. But these railroad guys, they're not going to lose out just because, they have to give Rockefeller, or they have to, provide these big rebates for the, big haulers. What they would do is they would pass on those expenses to the farmers, for example. Okay, so we'll talk more about the farmers later. They have so many problems as well. And that's just one of them. So, anyways, because these railroad guys indebted themselves, building these railroad companies and the the tracks and all that stuff, it's expensive. And so these railroad managers were basically forced to charge these inflated prices for shipping. And Cornelius Vanderbilt was a very powerful man. He was known for, bribing judges and legislators. He got them, elected his own people into office in order for them to do his bidding, pass legislation, pass laws that are going to benefit him and the railroads. And so what we're seeing here is an extreme abuse of the American public. Another way that you can look at these guys as well is as, they're like the kings. They were virtual industrial monarchs. They manipulated the railroad to their advantage, and as such, they exercised even more direct control over the American people than even the President of the United States. So think about that. Okay? They have so much power. They control the politicians and the judges and everybody. And then one of the things too is, you know how Rockefeller would get into these price wars, right, to knock out his competitors? Well, the railroad guys don't do that. They actually cooperated with each other, right? They avoided these costly price wars and competition and instead inflated prices for everybody. So they're an equal opportunity, abusers. This brings me to J.P. Morgan, okay, and investment banking. Now, J.P. Morgan, this guy right here, he's actually the inspiration for the monopoly man, the monopoly guy. So yeah, that's him. He's one of the most powerful men during this time. He's got the most powerful banking companies in the world. They're still around today. He's responsible for transforming the United States from this economic rookie into the strongest industrial power of the time. Right? He financed the formation of U.S. Steel, which is the company that he took over after he bought it from Andrew Carnegie, and turned that into the first $1 billion corporation in the United States. Okay, this guy had his hand in everything, in banking, in the railroads, in the steel, everything. And this guy is so rich that in 1895, he supplied the United States with $65 million worth in gold in order to resupply the U.S. Treasury. You heard that right. $65 million worth in gold to bail out the U.S. government. That's how rich he is. He bails out the government, okay? So, this guy is as ruthless as they come. He would use tactics like an interlocking directorate, which basically, if there was a company that he wanted to buy or to own or to go after, he would either bribe or put in his own agents into the board of directors of that company so that they could do his bidding, essentially, sell to him or destroy the company, whatever. So yeah, this guy is incredibly powerful, wealthy. What more can I say about him? He's your monopoly guy right there. Andrew Carnegie is an interesting one as well. Andrew Carnegie is a Scottish American. Okay, he came to the United States with his very poor parents in 1848. He was about 14 years old. But he was, really determined to really kind of that whole American dream, right? Pull himself up by his bootstraps, work hard, dedicate, sacrifice. And he was lucky that he had a mentor that kind of took him under his wing and taught him everything that he knew. Eventually with Carnegie, he built Pittsburgh's Carnegie Steel Company. which later on he sold to J.P. Morgan in 1901 for a whopping $480 million, which is the equivalent of about $13.6 billion today. And like I said, Morgan took that, $480 million company and doubled its value, okay, making it the first $1 billion company. So anyways, under Carnegie, he is going to lead the expansion of the steel industry in the United States. This guy was really involved with like the whole Civil War and the mechanization that took place during that time. Carnegie's an interesting guy because part of like like I said, his background here is that, he came from nothing. Like literally, if you've heard the term, rags to riches, that was him. They wrote that about him. They even had like a little cartoon. I forget what it was called. But it was like the life of Andrew Carnegie. And people knew him. They knew about him when they were first arriving in the United States. They thought, gee whiz, if that guy can make it, so could I. And so he came from a very, humble background. Part of his involvement in the Civil War and his amassing of all of that wealth, but at the cost of, precious American lives, is going to weigh heavily on him. So it's one of those things that, as he gets older and he's into his retirement, he's really trying to spend a lot of his time and his resources into literally like world peace and trying to prevent anyways, World War I from happening. And he really tried, and maybe I'll talk a little bit more about him later on when we get to that point. But, unfortunately, he wasn't able to establish peace or ensure peace. He kind of felt that, he had his hand in it, and he was responsible for some of it. And maybe because of that guilt, Carnegie ended up giving away over 90% of his wealth. Now, he did this through charities and foundations. And one of the things that you're going to have to do is one of the assignments, the signature assignment, is you're going to read the Gospel of Wealth. So these are, Carnegie's thoughts on what the rich should be doing with their wealth to improve society. And, because he gave away a majority of his wealth, it really stimulated a wave of philanthropy, among other, robber barons or captains of industry, whatever you want to call them. Not this guy, though. Vanderbilt in his entire lifetime, he gave away like $1 million. That's it. And it was given, to start basically Vanderbilt University. So anyways, what did he do with all that money? All of that money went into building libraries, like I said, world peace, education, scientific research. But if you ran into Carnegie on the street and, here's a guy that could literally change your life, right? Money-wise. He would not give you money, right? You wouldn't get anything from him. And again, this goes back to social Darwinism, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Let's talk about Henry Ford. Henry Ford and the assembly line, right? The Model T. First and foremost, right? So Henry Ford is a founder of Ford Motor Company. He did not, I repeat, he did not invent the automobile, nor did he invent the assembly line. But he brought these two things together, right, through his use of the assembly line and mass production. He basically manufactured these cars that many could afford. It ended up transforming, the automobile from a luxury item into something that was practical, that helped shape the modern world. And it also had a deep impact on the landscape, of the 20th century, which again, we'll talk more about later. But the Model T basically revolutionized transportation and the American industry. During this time, however, like I said, it's 1908 when he designed the Model T. We're not going to see cars be like a huge, huge thing until like the 20s. Okay, so we'll get to the 20s, later on. But anyways, as a result of his success, Fordism, right? We get Fordism, which is basically a combination of mass production of inexpensive goods with high wages for workers, okay? So he wasn't like some of his contemporaries where, he actually paid his workers a good wage. But he did that because, well, you got to think like a businessman, right? Why would you pay your employees very good wages, right? Especially when we're talking about an industry, not just an industry, but like a whole economy where it's all about profits. It's all about, increasing production. And that, of course, goes hand in hand with low wages. So why did he do it? Why did he pay his employees really well? Well, the reason why he did that was if you paid your employees well enough, then guess what? They can afford to be your customers too. So that's kind of like a little, little trick right there, right? You pay them well enough, but then, they're going to end up buying from you, being your customers. And so, those guys working on those assembly lines, their jobs are not easy in the sense that, long hours, mind-numbing work. They basically broke down the process of building an automobile into steps, right? So you basically have one guy repeating the same step over and over and over and over, pulling a lever or pushing a button, right? All day long. And so are these guys actually skilled? No, because anybody can do that. Anybody can pull a lever. Anybody can push a button. But that's kind of the problem here because those jobs are well paid, there's so much demand, to work there. People want to work there. And so you'd have like a line of people, waiting for an opportunity, hoping that there's an opening soon. Unfortunately, though, what that means is for those workers is, and this is true of, most American workers in assembly lines across the United States, is that there's really, the work that they're doing doesn't require any actual skill. And so if you are working long hours and it's hazardous, dangerous work, and something comes up, say your kid gets hurt and, or your wife is, in the hospital, something terrible has happened and you need to take some time off, right? You go up to your boss and you say, hey, sir, can I take a week off, to go take care of some family responsibilities? And they'll say something like, sure, bud, why don't you take, the whole year off, right? Because there's a line of people outside waiting to take your job. So what's it going to be? In terms of demanding better pay or better working conditions or, less hours, because some of these guys are working 12, 14, 16-hour days. They really don't have any kind of leverage here because really these guys become as replaceable as the same, parts that they're putting together. Okay? So what we're starting to see here is really mechanization taking command, more mechanized, these machines. The more mechanization you have, the lower your overhead, the higher your production. You're increasing the market, you're increasing your wealth. And this, like I said, it translates into the gospel of wealth, right? It's an incredible time of growth and the accumulation of wealth. is visible. Um, this idea that explained, many people explain what they were seeing as, that in the United States, in America, if you work hard enough, you can be rich. Sure, there's no titles of nobility, but, there's a lot of opportunity. And if you're not rich, then there must be something wrong with you. And so, under this idea of the gospel of wealth, right, the gospel of wealth basically says that if you work hard enough, you're going to be rich, right? Because it's based on talent and work and effort. And if you're not rich, there's got to be something wrong with you. Either, you're lazy, or you're stupid, or, you've got vices like, you're drunk, or maybe, you cheat on your wife, or you don't go to church, or maybe, there's just something deeper that's wrong with you. Maybe it has something to do with, your race, where you come from, what country you hail from. Because remember, we're looking at a country of immigrants. Immigration is exploding during this time. And so where did this, idea come from? Where did this justification for the wealth, for the power that these guys are having? Why is everybody okay with it? And this is because of social Darwinism, right? The idea that people gained wealth by survival of the fittest. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, survival of the fittest, it's because of Charles Darwin, right? Charles Darwin, of course, scientist, he was, doing all kinds of research and stuff like that. But one of the where this term basically comes from is he was looking at a species of birds, like a finch, near the Galapagos Island. And he noticed that the birds on the island had, like a different beak. They'd developed a different type of beak in order to be able to get at, the seed inside of the little nuts and stuff like that in order to survive. So they adapted, right? They evolved. And those are the ones that, were successful. That's what survival of the fittest actually is. Now, when people read about this, they thought that, it's like, wow, that's incredible. That's, because if you look at it in the animal, world, what equals success? And I'm not talking about success like how us humans measure it, right? Big house, big bank account, whatever. That's not what success is in the animal world, right? In the animal world, success equals reproduction, right? Passing off your seed to the next generation. And the only animals that get to do that are those that are the strongest, the fittest. If you look at different species of birds and stuff like that, they do their little dance, and they try to get the girl to go with them. Look at different types of bucks and stuff like that, how they'll fight, right, for superiority, and then they get the female doe, or lions, right? I mean, they'll fight it out for dominance, and then whoever wins gets the pride, right, of lionesses. That sort of thing. That's what success is. And when people read about this, they were like, "Wow, that is so impressive." And then they started looking around, the world around them, and they saw success in these men. They saw their huge houses. They saw the incredible amount of power that they had and wealth. And they said, well, gee whiz, why are these guys so successful? What makes them so good? Why are they so talented? What sets them apart from everybody else? And so what they did to Darwin's survival of the fittest, that theory of survival of the fittest, they applied it to society. right? They basically said, or they believe, that people that are rich and successful are fitter or better than the rest. And so when they're trying to look for like a reason as to why, then they start looking at, well, what do these guys have in common? What's the most obvious thing? Well, it must be that maybe certain ethnicities are better off. Maybe some races are smarter, more talented, more driven, more motivated, to edge out the competition in some ways, maybe even superior, right? More advanced. And so this, of course, comes from it's pseudoscience, right? Herbert Spencer. And this idea that, some ethnicities are better or more superior than others. And this is why they're more successful. This is why they're better. And so this idea of social Darwinism is going to, spill into not just American life, but this is like everywhere. Anytime that we look at these problems during the Gilded Age, it's like if you scratch the surface just a little bit, there it is, social Darwinism. It's right there. It's an attitude that is very prevalent in society. People, came to accept it as hard science, but we know today that it's a pseudoscience. It's not real. It's a fake science. But eventually, I wanted to touch on that because eventually what ends up happening is, well, if some ethnicities are better than others, then, it's going to lead to competition. These tiers where you'll have, let's say like, the Aryan race at the top, and then, other whites, and then, minorities at the bottom, brown skin, that sort of thing. And it's going to get really ugly pretty quickly. So that by the time we get to, like World War One, those arguments, that competition, is going to turn into nationalism. So we're better than them because we're not French, or because we're not, Dutch, or because we're not Spanish. We're better than them because we're American, or because we are, whatever. And so nationalism is going to be one of the major causes of World War One. But we'll get into that soon enough, okay? Let's talk about some of the natural resources and technologies in the United States at the time. It's no secret that the United States was rich in natural resources. They really helped to build the modern United States as we know it. These resources like lumber, copper, iron, coal, petroleum, they're used in just about everything, okay? Freight cars, coal for heating, all of these things, petroleum, was refined to get kerosene, and then gasoline, and then diesel. The U.S. is super rich in these resources, and just like they have them in the North, they also have them in the South. But unfortunately, for the South, you have, different rates, different wages that they're paying, their employees and stuff like that. And some of it goes back to that, competition between North versus South, trying to keep the South, from becoming an actual competitor. So, they deliberately paid them less for the same stuff. This goes back to, the carpetbaggers and all of that stuff that you're reading about in your book. But there's so much competition, even among these captains of industry, right? Lots of different inventions, Thomas Edison, of course, and his electric company, the telegraph, Western Union, telephone, all of these companies are essentially going to build these trusts. And, there's all kinds of competition over who's going to rule those industries, how they're going to rule those industries, who's going to control them, how much they're going to charge. There's a lot of money to be made, and there's a lot of power to be lost here. So there's so much competition between them. And remember, these guys, they don't like to lose. And they will do just about anything to, keep control over these industries as well. I'm going to show you very quickly this this illustration, of the United States. If we look at the key right here, it says immigrants, right? Foreign-born and children of foreign or mixed parentage by county. So anywhere that you see, the purples and the blues, we're looking at those counties with the population is either 75% or more that are immigrants. Okay. Now this is in 1910. Okay. So what that tells us is that by 1910, there has been so much immigration, to the United States from, all over the world, that those demographics have completely shifted in those areas, where now a majority of the people in those counties are not from here. They are foreigners. They are not from the United States. And so you could look at, places like New York, Detroit, Chicago, all of these purples and blues, they have the highest number of immigrant populations than anywhere else. When you come out to the West, and again, one of the questions is, why are immigrants coming to these areas here? Well, what would you say? What would you speculate as to why they're coming to New York, to Detroit, to Chicago? Why there? Well, because of industrialism, right? Because of those industrial jobs, because of the factories. That's the number one sort of reason pulling them in to those areas from other parts of the world. When you look at the West, and this is, the lecture for next time, but when you look at the West, the reasons are a little bit different. And the numbers also reflect that, right? So anything pink, we're talking 25 to 50% are immigrants. You do have some shades of blue as well. And again, so why are people going out west? Well, what's attracting them there? Well, part of that is the gold rush, right? Another part is the Homestead Act, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. And of course, the railroad, right? So that's another, that's like the push and pull, right? That's part of the reason why those immigrants are going to those regions of the United States. When you look at the South, the South is all yellow, right? So it's less than 10% immigrants. So why aren't they going there? Why aren't immigrants attracted to the South? Well, there just isn't as much opportunity, right? Remember, you've got sharecropping down there. There's no land to be had. I mean, it's a mess. So they're definitely not attracted to that area. And then, the one place that I'm the most interested in is, of course, Webb County, right? And wouldn't you know it, it's covered by the darn legend, right? So I don't even know. I don't know what Webb County's numbers would have looked like. But and that tells you something, right, about how historians feel about anything south of San Antonio, right? It's like, we matter. We're Americans, right? But if you had to guess, what do you think? You think Webb County, do you think, South Texas would be purple, blue? What would be your guess? We could look at some of the other areas around here, right? Like El Paso and stuff like that, which are blue and purples, right? The Valley, Brownsville. And we see that they're blue and purples. I mean, you can look outside right now, right? Look outside your neighborhood and you see it, right? We have a very high Hispanic population. I think it's over 95%. But we're looking at this in 1910. So I'm going to ask you the question, why, what's bringing people to this area in 1910? What's pushing them into Webb County, into Cameron County, into, all of these South Texas towns? Well, what's going on in Mexico in 1910? You've got the Porfiriato that's happening. There's a civil war taking place in Mexico, and people are fleeing, and so they end up coming here. And that kind of brings me to this other point as well, because the majority of the immigration that is coming to the United States at this time is mostly from southern and eastern European countries. Okay, these are the primary sources for the urban growth, right? For the big cities, this is where the migrants and immigrants are coming from, right? The immigrants, which are people that are coming from outside of the United States, they're coming from Italy, Eastern Germany, Poland, Serbia, and Jews that are being kicked out of places like Russia, for example. So when they come here, they will all mostly live like in the same neighborhoods. They build these like ethnic enclaves, which is why you get communities like Little Italy, stuff like that. And then the other sort of source of movement about the United States. This is, of course, the African Americans. African Americans that are leaving the South, heading up north or going out west to rural as well as urban areas. And of course, you have homesteaders, which we're going to talk more about in the next lecture. Okay, so major problems here. All of this immigration, all these people coming to the United States. What do we do with all these people? It's going to create so many problems for these cities, for these communities. You have problems with housing. You have problems with businesses, transportation. Where are they going to work? Where are they going to live? How are they going to move about? So some of the results of this massive influx of people is the development of tenement houses. Now, most of these buildings had about 4 apartments on each floor, and they could fit, 4 families. But as more and more people move to the cities, the owners of those buildings, they will actually divide. They're gonna like put up more walls to fit in as many people as they can. Let me see if I have a picture on here. Oh, I don't. But they'll do this, and so what ends up happening is those houses, those tenements, are just really poor conditions. They are, just the perfect environment for spreading diseases like tuberculosis. They are super crowded. They are over, charging for the space. Some of those rooms where people are living don't even have windows. They don't have indoor plumbing or anything like that. So sanitation is a huge problem. And again, this leads to, the spread of more diseases. And really, one of the worst things is that people start to associate diseases like tuberculosis with the immigrants that are poor. But nevertheless, I mean, it's going to be a huge problem, especially because as they develop the subways and stuff like that, the transportation gets better. One of the innovations there is, of course, the electrical, energy streetcars and the subways, and this is going to lead to a lot of people that can actually afford to leave the city to do that. And so they'll end up moving to the suburbs, for example. And when they do that, they take their tax dollars with them. So this is just going to lead to, more problems in their city. Trash is piling up. It's super crowded. Remember, yes, there's cars, but the number one method of transportation for people is horses, right? So horses go to the bathroom, wherever. And it's not like the WBCA where you have the little guys with the shovel and, they're picking up after the horses. So it's everywhere. It is so dirty. It is so just, the cities are just a sight to be seen. And, unfortunately, for the city, when the rich get up and leave and they go to the suburbs, they can just rely on transportation to get into town and go to work, or their business owners, they go downtown, but they'll commute. And so what's left behind is all the workers and the immigrants, and the tenements, and it's just a really, really bad situation. Okay, let's talk about the development of the labor unions, okay? I want to remind you that because of, standardized machines and the simplified assembly lines, a lot of what's happening here is, those skilled craftsmen, those skilled laborers are going to end up getting replaced with this endless supply of unskilled workers that are coming into the United States because of the massive amounts of immigration. But to put things into perspective here, by 1900, by the year 1900, 1/10 of the population, right, they owned 90% of the wealth in the United States. All right, 1/10 of the population owns 90% of the wealth. Workers powered machines, but they did not profit at all in the same way that the owners did. Right? This is an economy that favors lever pullers over craftsmanship. Okay? This made the workers, like I said, interchangeable, right? Just as the parts that they were working with. There's less originality and creativity in the products that are being, designed. There's less value that is being put on manual skills. Now, between 1880 and 1890, several 100,000 unskilled, immigrants came to the United States. So, for example, some of the problems that these workers are facing, workers in the steel industry, for example, which is a keystone of the American economy. A lot of them are, from Eastern or Southern European countries. They work, 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, sometimes, 15, 16-hour days, no days off, right? Remember, this is a job market that favors the businesses, not the workers. And the thing is that alone, a worker is really powerless to do anything versus the ownership. But together, they could strike. And so businesses had, a whole array of resources at their disposal that they could use to break some of those strikes. For example, they had, high-powered lawyers. They had scabs, which were, replacement workers. They could buy the local press, make sure that the newspapers are painting these strikers as, un-American and unpatriotic. Or they would literally pay these thugs to beat up the strikers, or pay the judges to order them back to work. They could even request, the governors to send in troops. When the workers would walk away and stuff like that, they could even use lockouts, right, to force them to accept the terms. So basically, if we're all going to walk out of their jobs and we're gonna try to send them a message, right? Like, you need us more than we need you. You can't make any money without us, and so we want better pay or better working conditions or whatever the terms are. And so we're gonna walk away. We're gonna walk away. We're gonna leave the work there. You're not gonna make any money, and this is what's gonna bring them to the bargaining table, so to speak. But then what ends up happening is, they walk out and the bosses basically lock them out. They chain up the doors and they say, okay, well, you know what? You want to play that game? Let's see who can hold out the longest. How long can you go before your kids get hungry? How many days is it going to take for you to break? I got millions of dollars. I can wait, forever. How long can you? And so unfortunately, those lockouts, they worked to break those strikes and compel those employees to come back and sign these yellow dog contracts, right? What is a yellow dog contract? Well, think about it. What's a yellow dog? It's like the two most popular breeds in the United States are the labs, right? And the golden retrievers. And I have both of those breeds. And what are they known for? They're known for their loyalty. You could do anything to them. You could say anything to them, and they'll still look at you with these big eyes and, oh, I'm a good boy. I'm a good boy. That's all it takes. And that's what a yellow dog contract is, right? What they want is, we're gonna let you come back to work, but you have to sign a contract basically saying that you're going to be loyal to us and you're not going to join a union. And if you do that, you can keep your job. So unfortunately, these guys have so much power, so many resources. It is so difficult to get them to come to the table, to make any kind of accommodations for their workers, because for the most part, these strikes were seen as unpatriotic and foreign, because the people that are striking are not from here, right? They're immigrants. And so it goes against capitalism, it goes against, American ideals, it goes against, working hard. And so it's very, very difficult. But there's so much criticism. There's a complete, disparity of wealth here. It's visually evident. I mean, there's literally a book written about this, How the Other Half Lives, where people can see it. They see those big houses, they see the mansions, and then they see these kids on the street living, barefooted, and where are their parents? They're working in these factories and they can't even make enough money to pay the rent. It's extremely unfair, but again, why doesn't anybody feel bad for the workers? Well, because of social Darwinism, right? There must be lazy, or they want handouts, or they're foreigners, or they don't deserve it and they didn't work hard, and I worked hard for my money, why should I give it to them? It all goes back to those ideas of social Darwinism and survival of the fittest. Okay, so let's talk about some of these labor unions. Now, the National Labor Union is the first labor union in the United States. They have about 600,000 members all over the U.S., both skilled and unskilled workers, as well as farmers. But they don't allow any Chinese or women or blacks, okay? Now, they did fight for the 8-hour workday, but they were not successful in, striking for that. And again, why are they fighting for the 8-hour workday? Well, because they're working 12, 14, 15, 16-hour days, 7 days a week. Anyway, so the National Labor Union dissolves in 1872 after the Depression and some major strikes. But the good news is that the Knights of Labor is basically going to pick up right where the National Labor Union left off. Right, so they start in 1869. They have about 90,000 members. Now they represent both skilled and unskilled workers, men, women, blacks, and whites. But no liquor dealers or professional gamblers or lawyers or bankers or stockbrokers, because they basically see these guys as, a part of the problem. Now their leader is Terence Powderly. Okay, and so he's this Irish guy. He's a very capable speaker. The Knights of Labor are going to win many strikes for the 8-hour days. And, they're going to take on Jay Gould's Wabash Railroad Company in 1885. And when they successfully, win that strike, you're going to see that membership balloon all the way to 750,000 members across the United States. So they're huge. We also have the American Federation of Labor. Now, this one's interesting. This one's led by Samuel Gompers, who is a Jewish cigar maker. He has a very strong voice as well. Part of their demands here are for better wages, better hours, better working conditions, but they only represent skilled craftsmen, okay? Not unskilled craftsmen. They think that they're a part of the problem, they're taking their jobs and they're the reason why you have these, horrible low wages. They also do not want to represent women or blacks. And yeah, basically, right? That's what the AFL is all about right there. I also want to talk about the American Railway Union. Now, this one's led by Eugene Debs, who is a railroad fireman and also future socialist presidential candidate. This union is based out of Chicago. And again, Chicago is a very important city because it's this huge railroad hub, right, where all of the railroads basically converge right there. So what the American Railway Union does here is they want to unionize, they want to represent all the railroad workers, regardless of their craft or their service, whatever they do, it doesn't matter. And they are going to be instrumental in the Pullman strike that I'm going to talk about in a minute. I want to talk about also very briefly about the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. It's a mouthful. And they are one of the largest labor unions in the United States, primarily because, it's all women. They have a primarily female leadership as well. Membership. Now, they do get in trouble because there's a lot of disputes, internal disputes about whether they should also represent unskilled workers or should they just favor the skilled workers. And they are going to be involved with the uprising of the 10,000 and the Great Revolt. Lastly, the Wobblies, the International Workers of the World. Now, if you look at these dates, right, you have the National Labor Union 1866 and the Knights of Labor 1869, AFL 1886, American Railway Union 1893, International Ladies Garment Workers 1900. The last one, right, the Wobblies, the International Workers of the World. They're called the Wobblies because it's IWW. And so they're the last ones of these unions that I want to discuss, and they're the most radical in terms of, their beliefs. They have ties to socialist and anarchist labor movements. And what I meant by, radical in their beliefs is they believe that all workers should be united as a social class versus capitalism, okay? They believe that their workers should elect their managers. What a concept, right? But, they have about 40,000 members at their peak. And really, other unions like the American Federation of Labor, they kind of look at the Wobblies as too radical and not helpful at all because it brings conflict, to the other labor unions. And unfortunately, once the Red Scare grips the nation, the Wobblies are going to become a target of government, agencies and stuff like that. Before we break, with this lecture, I want to talk about just a few of these strikes and demonstrations. The first one I want to talk about is the Haymarket Riot. No, wait a minute. No, it's the Great Strike of 1877. Yes, of course. Let's start with that one. So this is where it all just kind of, starts to fall apart. In 1877, you have four major railroads decided to cut wages by 10%. And this began in Martinsburg, West Virginia, and the strike literally took, it ended 45 days for it to end. It spread to other cities. It was totally organic. Like, there's no unions involved with this strike. It was literally, the railroads decided to cut wages, and people said, oh, hell no, enough is enough. They ended up having to call the local and state militias and the federal troops to come in and put down these strikes. And like I said, these spontaneous outbreaks of violence took place towards the railroad. By the end of it, there's 100 people dead. And, when you look at it, you see just this incredible amount of government intervention here on the side of the railroad, right? So not the American people. When the government steps in, when the authorities are called, they, came in and they intervene on the side of the companies. And the mentality was, workers be damned. The railroad will keep working. And so this is really kind of, the beginning of these demonstrations. Another one I want to talk about is the Haymarket Riot. And so this one is interesting too. It takes place in Chicago. The Knights of Labor is involved with the demonstration. They organized it and all of that. The police moved in to disrupt, this protest. But unfortunately, a dynamite bomb was thrown, and it killed several people, including the police. Now, eight known anarchists are going to end up getting arrested. There is no evidence that these guys are guilty, but the judge decides that because of, their incendiary messages, that they were guilty of conspiracy, basically saying that because they're spreading around all of this anarchy, that they're responsible because they probably convinced whoever is responsible to throw that bomb. Out of the 8 that were arrested, 5 of them are sentenced to death. One of them committed suicide, and the other 4 are executed. And the other 3 are going to get very stiff prison terms. Okay, now this is going to hurt the membership in the Knights of Labor because, unfortunately, people associated the Haymarket riot with them because they did organize the protest, but they didn't have anything to do with the bombing. And so there's, we start to see some of their membership kind of die off right there. No pun intended, but, their numbers went down. So, yeah, I mean, what is the message here that the government is trying to say? Like, these guys, there's no evidence, but because they're anarchists, because, they might be immigrants or foreigners, they see them as a threat. And they quite literally, sentence them to death, even though there's zero evidence here that they did anything wrong. Let's talk about the Homestead strike. This one, of course, is at Carnegie's Homestead steel plant near Pittsburgh. And the workers, again, they're angry over pay cuts. Farmers are upset, that the railroads keep charging them so much and they have so much financial debt. The company ended up calling in about 300 armed guys to break up the strike. And the workers were armed. I mean, there's a bloody battle. There's 10 people dead by the end of it. 60 others are injured. Unfortunately, once the strike was over, the union, which used to be pretty strong at Homestead, ended up pretty, broken after this. The plant manager locked them out and replaced them with scabs, which, remember, are replacement workers. And the government intervened again against the union, and this ended up breaking the back of the union at Homestead. Okay, the Homestead strike is really kind of like an omen for the Panic of 1893. Once this panic is in full bloom, there's going to be all kinds of protests as well. And one of those is the Pullman strike. Okay, so Pullman, one of the railroad kings, remember, Pullman's company is just outside of Chicago, right? So they built a company town. And if you wanted to work with him, you were required to live in the company town, okay? The rent was mandatory as well. right? So all these things are coming together as a background. In 1894, as the panic worsens, Pullman orders at 25% of the wage cuts for the workers, right? At the time, he does not cut the rent. But when this is pointed out to him, he reacts as though, how dare you question my judgment? That's kind of the attitude that he had. And he says that, to do what he says as if he's the father. And, they were being disobedient Pullman workers. And so they ended up going on strike. And they sought help from the American Railway Union. Remember, they have 150,000 members. And so they asked that, they help them support the strike, and, this would be good for them as well. And so they come up with a plan, right? The union agrees to refuse to pull any of Pullman's carts, okay? Because Pullman's workers were not unionized. And so these Pullman cars, they were almost as common as cabooses, right? They were very, very common. It was a typical train car. And this is going to drive trains to a halt, especially in Chicago. And so Chicago, remember, it's the Crossway. It's a huge railroad hub, in the United States at the time. And so at the time, when this goes down, basically you're stalling all the traffic. You're stalling all of the railroads moving about the country. And the federal government is going to intervene. They're going to get involved, and they're going to order the workers back to work. And the rationale for this was that the workers were breaking the law because they said that it was illegal to interfere with the delivery of the mail. And so therefore, he ordered them back to work. The government once again intervened on behalf of the companies, and they're promoting the management instead of protecting the American people. And this is just some of the the problems that resulted from industrialism, from the Gilded Age politics, from the abuses of the corporations and, the robber barons involved, the unwillingness and inability for the government to act, the American public's desire to look the other way when the plight of the American worker is staring them in the face. So all of these things are happening, at the same time as, Reconstruction is taking place. It's not like Reconstruction happened first and then industrialism and then, the West. All of this stuff is happening after the Civil War. And so one of the things that I want you to do is to look at the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. I don't know if I posted the video on Canvas, but you've got that little quiz to do. That is the single worst, disaster to take place in New York City up until September 11th. So take a look at that. Don't forget to do the assignment. And let me know if you have any questions on anything, okay? I hope you enjoyed the lecture. I'll catch you on the next one for the transformation of the American West.